Hello everyone!
Hello!
Welcome to Clo Knits, and today we have a little bit of a change in decor and invited guest. Today we're with Naomi at Espace Tricot, and we're doing something special. We decided to do a cardigan knit-along. You want to talk to us a little bit about you, Naomi?
Absolutely. Well, I've been delighted to welcome Claudia here to Espace Tricot. We just filmed part 1 of this 2-part podcast together. So if you haven't caught that, we'll put a link down below. You might want to start there to get a bit of background. We'll do a brief summary here.
Yeah.
So I am one of the owners of Espace Tricot here in Montreal. My co-owner, Steph, is usually on our podcast with me, and usually we're here.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a shake-up to have different faces on screen.
We've known each other since before Naomi owned Espace Tricot, actually, and we've been knitting together in various places and various things, and it's just always a pleasure.
It's so much fun. We're basically neighbors and don't meet up enough based on how close we live to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we just came completely across to the other side of the city to do this.
Absolutely. But I love it because I get to touch all the beautiful yarns in your store. It's definitely one of my favorite stores in Montreal. There's just so many choices, beautiful knits to try on. And today we decided to do this knit along that we actually thought about for a while before launching it. But the reason behind it is that both Naomi and I at Knit City in Montreal, it was in May or was it in April?
Yeah.
It was in May. Decided that we needed to knit more cardigans. And so both of us thought, well, if we both want to knit more cardigans and we're both kind of procrastinating on that, let's set up a knit along so we can actually push each other a little bit.
Yes. So you'll find more about our decisions behind that, what kind of patterns we like, why we haven't knit many cardigans, or why we want to have more knitted cardigans. All of that summary is in the first episode over on the Espace Tricot YouTube channel and linked down below.
So we're going to now talk about more specific things about sweater construction that makes us, go for a certain type of cardigans, and maybe little things to consider when we're choosing the cardigans we want to knit, because I know that it is something that a lot of people, when I talk about sweaters, don't know necessarily what to look for, and then they are not always 100% happy with the results when they're knitting something. It's happened to me too, let's be honest.
I have a whole workshop that I taught for the Knit City Virtual a few times that I held about sweater structure and how you want to choose patterns that you want to knit and also want to wear, because that doesn't always match up, and we'll talk a bit about that as well. So it's definitely something that's always on my mind, recommending patterns and yarn to customers, thinking about what we knit for the store, thinking about what I knit for myself.
Yeah, because you do have so much experience not only in knitting your own sweaters for your own body, but because you own a yarn store, you get to consider all the different types of yarn choices too. Because like a sweater, a cardigan pattern can be beautiful, but when knit with a certain yarn, then turn out to be not exactly what you hoped. Yeah. And so I'm super happy to have this chat with you. You have so much knowledge that I just want to absorb.
It's just I love talking about sweaters. I love talking about yarn and choices. So I'm happy to be here.
So I'm gonna do it a little bit interview style. I also have things that I want to chat about, but absolutely. I have a question that just popped.
That's a great idea.
What's the first thing you would consider as far as construction when choosing a cardigan in particular?
So I think that the main elements of how we wear a sweater versus a cardigan are broadly the same, and there are these basic building block elements to any kind of garment that remain the same across the range of garments. And by that, I'm thinking starting with the collar, crew neck, v-neck, and then the shoulder construction. There's a reason why this is like one of the top filters to use when you're looking for patterns on Ravelry. It's kind of the basic thing you want to decide at the beginning of knitting a pattern. Broadly, do I want a raglan? Do I want a yoke? Do I want a saddle shoulder, slightly less common, growing in popularity?
Yeah.
Do I want a set-in sleeve? Really great fit, a little trickier to knit.
Yeah.
But there are ways to get around that too. So that kind of is I often find the main starting point when you're deciding what kind of pattern to knit. And that's going to be pretty much the same for a pullover or for a cardigan, because you probably know by now what you personally like to wear, and that might not be always what you like to knit. I love knitting colorwork yoke sweaters. there are a few that I have that I really love wearing, but I find for me I have quite broad shoulders and a very small bust, that they often, I'm like a lozenge shape and yokes are spherical.
Yeah.
And so depending on the fit, I've knit some that no fault of the pattern at all, on me they buckle, or I didn't quite get the size right, or the armhole just cuts a little too low, and there are all sorts of fit issues that I personally have with my physiognomy with yoke sweaters, even though I love knitting them so much.
Yeah,
so I've got to
that's
think
tricky.
about that, and that also, I say this as I'm wearing a yoke. This is our Livresque pattern. It is currently in an ebook for Espace Tricot, but if you want to knit this for the knit along, or if you want to buy yarn from it, but regardless whether you buy yarn or not, drop us an email. You can find our email address on our website, and I'm happy to send you along the pattern for the knit along. All that to say, so this, like, a yoke sits a little closer to the body. It has slightly less flexibility, I find, between the arms and the body. The raglan, interesting bit of history that I learned a while ago. The structure itself. Oh, why am I pointing to me? I'm not wearing one. Here's the structure of a raglan. The increases happen down 4 seams around the shoulders, and this puts the increases right where you want that movement. You don't have increases in the middle of the body where, you know, you're not really moving unless you're doing a shimmy shake or whatever. I don't know. And this construction, as a sewn construction for cut garments, cut and sew woven garments, was developed in the military for soldiers, because it allows you to easily raise your arm with a saber in the awful wars of the 1700s or something, and that's where the raglan construction comes from.
Super interesting.
So, and as a result, it's that iconic baseball jersey style too. Again, that movement of the pitching or batting. I don't know how to play baseball. I'm approximating the movement here.
So not American.
No, we have a different one. We have a sport called rounders, and the bat is much smaller. And when you throw it behind you as you run. Anyway, it's a completely different sport. Tangent. All that to say that a raglan offers a lot more movement. Not to say you can't move in yokes. Obviously, I have some yoke sweaters that I find so comfortable and totally great for going about my everyday life.
But some of them end up a little poncho-y, where you lift your hand, lift your arms, and everything comes up a lot. And
that can be part of the design feature. It's, if you know, it allows those beautiful figurative colorwork yokes that may be the priority for you because they're so stunning.
But in the cardigan version, I feel like the yokes, yoke sweaters, because they're often very close to the neck, it makes them very difficult to wear open, right?
It can it has that heaviness. It wants to fall away from the front, because there's some tension there that gets released when you're stretched over the shoulders a bit, and that tension gets released when you open it, so it falls open slightly.
So if you're choosing a yoke sweater, you're kind of committing to buttoning it up all the way.
I find, personally, that's how I've worn them. Definitely, I've seen very beautiful yoke sweaters, yoke cardigans that can be worn open. Yoke cardigans, I would say, pick one that is a cardigan. Don't pick a sweater and try to make it a cardigan. Because, this is what I found when designing this one, with a yoke sweater, your increases are placed evenly all around in a circle every inch or so, say. Whereas with a raglan, you're increasing just in 4 particular places, every row or every other row, depending on the pattern or whatever balance that may be. So when you have these increases all around in a yoke, if you have a split down the middle, those increases aren't balanced. So so this has an increase, sort of say, here and here,
next to the button
and here
band.
and here, and they're evenly placed. But if I had just separated a yoke cardigan in the round by just like working back and forth around the front point instead, I could have an increase here and then no increase until about here, and that would make the button bands kind of
lopsided
shift and make them lopsided. And that's really important with colorwork yoke, especially because the colorwork might be offset as well. So it's something to think about. If there's a pullover that you really, really love and you think that would make a great cardigan, it could, but bear in mind that it might have an effect on how the button band and the sides lie, because those increases are not balanced with each other
That
around
makes
the front.
so much more sense on also like bunch of Ravelry patterns that I've seen that have a cardigan version and a pullover version, and they are totally different version, even though it's the same gauge, it's the same pattern.
Yeah.
Like it's not just the button band. Like it,
Exactly.
because technically you're like, oh well, you're selling both in two different things. Why not just merge it together?
The designer has probably done quite a bit of work to turn it into a cardigan for you.
That
Yes.
makes sense. Thank you so much. The one thing though that you can do that's that I've done before that's simple is to if you have a cardigan that is knit back and forth and you want to knit it in the round, that's totally doable
Yes,
though. Adding
absolutely.
steek stitches
Because those
to
balanced increases are already there because
Yeah.
they've been put that way when it's flat. So joining in the round, adding steek stitches,
easy peasy.
really easy, and you don't have to worry about casting on fewer stitches to accommodate that steek because
Nope.
you're going to put a button band in.
Exactly.
So the steek is basically, you want the steek to be about as wide as your
Yeah.
button band, and then those stitches are replaced by the button band, and your measurement ends up the same.
Yeah, and the picking up the stitches for the button band and everything is the same as if you were knitting it back and forth. So that's something you can do. Not turn a pullover into a cardigan,
Yeah.
though that's a little bit tricky.
It probably is just sort of, you might be setting yourself up for some issues you hadn't expected if you just try that straight up.
In my last video, if you've seen it, my last video was talking about alterations that you should be making maybe in a sweater, or some that are a little bit tricky, and one of them was the tricky part. I said you might be setting yourself up for a world of pain. Hopefully not, but you know. So that's one, like obviously the top part. We were also discussing ease in cardigans because it could be a little bit different for pullovers versus cardigans when you're
Yes.
talking about ease, because like you see here I have a v-neck, so I don't want this thing to be falling off my shoulders all the time. I don't want to have to readjust things all the time. So how do you account for ease in a cardigan? What's your thought on that?
So I've already talked quite a bit about yoke fits. I'll just go back there quickly. In pullovers, we really like a lot of ease in our yokes. Often patterns recommend a fair amount of positive ease in yoke sweaters, and that again can help with the movement, getting fabric where you need it. But in a cardigan, you generally want a little less ease unless you know that you're always going to wear it closed. Because
Like a pullover.
yeah, if you pick a bust measurement of a cardigan that has the kind of ease you'd put in a sweater, then you wear that cardigan open, you've just added, what have I got here, like 5 inches of ease? So you want to take that into account, and that's, I think, at the heart of a lot of comments I've heard from people where they've made a cardigan, especially an open front cardigan that doesn't even have buttons, isn't designed to be worn buttoned up. You forget about all of that space that it's going to have as it's sitting on you. So I've heard a lot of complaints about especially sort of open shawl collar cardigans,
Big ones.
whether yoked or raglan, talk about raglan in a second,
Yeah.
that fall off their shoulders. And that's because you put too much ease.
There's
in
nothing
it.
holding
There's
it together.
Yeah.
There's nothing holding it in
wants
front.
to slide
So
off.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, especially if it's in a heavier, say, superwash merino, or if it's longer and it has all the weight of the cardigan. You know, sometimes these sweaters can have 1.5 kilos of yarn in them, right?
Yeah, they're heavy.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah, and the choice of yarn makes a difference too. Yeah, because like I've learned that with experience with my pullovers anyway, that if I use superwash yarn, mostly like in a fingering weight it works generally, but if I double that fingering weight or I use a worsted weight in a superwash yarn, I feel like my sweaters are way too heavy. And I feel the weight, and I'm a tiny person, so I don't use that much yarn, but still I feel the weight of that pullover on me. So if I were to make a cardigan, I feel like it would pull, and also like the button band ends up pulling or things because it's
potentially because the weight is dragging, and superwash merino also, for example, is more slippery. It's going to slide on your clothes or on your skin, whereas a more rustic light yarn, not only is it lighter already and loftier because it doesn't have the superwash treatment and coating, it also is going to kind of sit and grab, and it's not going to want to slide around. There's a reason why untreated worsted weight yarns can have 250 yards in a skein, and superwash merino ones have 180 to 210. It's because all of that weight in the treatment is a heavier yarn, and so to get 100 grams you get less yardage in that. It's pretty obvious,
Yeah.
evident phenomenon.
And
But coming back to this one for
Yeah.
ease, there is a lot, for all I'm saying you want less ease in a cardigan, this one actually, the recommended ease is quite a lot. I think I said about 10 inches in the pattern, and that's what I wear it with.
Perfect.
But the body increases so fast from the shoulders that you don't have all of that ease in the shoulders. It is sitting close to the skin and it's lying flat here. I didn't put short rows in. And as everyone knows from pullovers, if we don't put short rows in, often the sweater pulls back, it hoiks up in front. But in the V-neck cardigan, it's
smart.
okay because it's going to keep that fabric sitting flat against the collarbone. As a result, it does pull up a little bit in front, and that's kind of how I knew that was going to happen with this shoulder placement. So it is really cropped. Most people do want to knit this one a bit longer. This is a macaron cardigan, by the way. It's a free Espace Tricot pattern on Ravelry.
It's absolutely in my queue. I said it in the previous video, but like it's got the little extra here, but it's still very, it doesn't feel big.
Yeah.
And I think it's because once it's cropped, but also, I guess it depends if you start it. If you didn't have those super fast increase, then you would have had to start wider, and then it would fall off the shoulders. Yeah,
right? or the armhole would be a lot deeper. And I don't love super deep armholes.
No, I feel you. I'm like that too. Maybe because we have shorter torsos. If you have a really deep armhole, then you end up with no body. You just have arms.
It's a look.
It's a look. But that's something to consider. I think when people choose sweaters or cardigans, because we're talking about cardigans, you look at the pictures of what the person has created, and you fall in love with that picture, or you might fall in love with some aspects of that picture, but not all of it. And that's something we discussed together, where like, don't forget that you can always change the length of any given sweater. Well, mostly. Some are more tricky. Like I'm thinking about the Brienne that I'm knitting. It's knit sideways, right?
Right.
So that's the kind of cardigan ways you have to think about it a little bit, but I have more hair in my mouth. That's always happening. That's okay. You have to think about the length differently, but I'm just saying that because like if someone loves the raglan style of this sweater and the neck, then they can always make it longer. There's like really no reason why you shouldn't consider a sweater. And like you say, I think looking at patterns that have the collar that you like and the shape that you like in the shoulders will give you the best options for sweaters you want to knit. Shaping wise, just the top is basically what you need to look at, and the gauge.
Absolutely.
Once you're happy with the gauge and the general construction, then you can always knit longer or shorter. If there's one like yours right now is quite long.
Absolutely.
But I could choose to knit one of those and knit it to this length if I wanted to. There's really...
Which is the beauty of top-down sweaters specifically, but you can also work those modifications bottom-up.
Yeah.
There are simple ways to do that, kind of try it on as you go.
Yeah.
The core elements of the shoulder and upper body are really going to be what's harder to work modifications on. You have another question?
That's what I'm thinking about.
I like this interview style.
Well, I mean, obviously when you're choosing your pattern, you have to consider, like we said, the yarn. We are big cheerleaders when it comes to using non-superwash yarns for sweaters. I know that a lot of people are scared of non-superwash yarns for mostly either the feel on their skin or the washability. And to me, those 2 points, it's a matter of trying things, right? Like for the wool, I know that like some people itch when they wear alpaca, some people itch when they wear mohair, some people itch when they wear wool. Like you do have to test a little bit to know what works for you, but there are definitely yarns that are more itchy. Like for me, a Corey worsted will be itchier than we have here Brooklyn Tweed Shelter, which is very soft. Like I don't think, like my daughter is very, she itches quite fast, but I think this for her is fine, you know?
Which you wouldn't necessarily think from feeling it in the skein, but it really softens when it's washed. And that is pretty much across the board the beautiful thing about untreated yarns. They behave so beautifully when they're washed. They can withstand higher temperatures. I did a little reel about how I block my rustic yarns, and I said hot water like a bath, like it wants to have a bath, and people were shocked, like, won't it felt?
Yes.
And it won't. Yarn won't instantly felt upon contact with heat. It's heat and agitation that creates felting. More, it's like, I mean, wool is natural untreated wool. It's like hair. It'll be conditioned and you know, the sheep don't felt.
They don't. Well, they're rock. I can imagine the sheep running in the and then becoming smaller.
The sheep aren't having a warm bath.
No,
poor things.
But if they're sweating and they're moving, they're not felting.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think, to speak to that, a cardigan is a fantastic project if you have been really wanting to try an untreated wool, or a more rustic kind of untreated wool. If you already like, for example, I'm going to use Durerum Natura Ulysse in my cardigan, or at least that's what I'm starting out to swatch with. It's an untreated merino, and this may well feel very much softer to somebody than the Cori worsted, for example, or Nora Corion. So think about a cardigan, though, it's always going to be an overlayer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a little bit different. You're wearing a tank top, but a wider neckline on a cardigan like that, it's often going to sit over another garment.
Just like you.
Exactly. And it's going to also, that being over something is also going to protect it from, for example, underarms, upper back, areas where wool might get a little sweatier and damp or whatever, just with the natural course of the day. We all feel that. So those issues of whether you're going to have to wash it very regularly and whether it's going to be close to your skin and itching are kind of solved by picking a cardigan.
Yeah.
Wool itself is pretty much self-cleaning. I don't wash my sweaters very often at all. Yes. Pretty much if they're stained, or if for some reason I've got particularly hot and uncomfortable and damp in a sweater, I might freshen it up right away. But
just airing it
out.
Or if it gets out of shape, sometimes what happens is by wearing it a lot, it gets kind of loose, like the ribbing will get a little loose on some of the fibers. Give it its
back, and washing will do that. But I find hand washing sweaters even just easier than putting a load of laundry in. Soak with a drop of Eucalan soak in a mixing bowl. Half an hour, dump it in the spin cycle of your washing machine. I do that.
If you so that's one thing where, like, I changed washing machine recently, and unfortunately my spin cycle of my washing machine does a lot of back and forth instead of just going straight for the spinning. So I've kind of given up on putting it in the spin cycle, but if it's smaller items, I will put it in my salad spinner. Which also kind of, you know, does it. Or obviously just roll it in a towel and step on it to get all. And I have heated floors in my bathroom, so I put it on my heated floors and I crank it a little bit, and so it dries really quickly.
You've made me think I just switched machines from a top loader, which just goes round and round and round,
which was amazing,
to a front loader. So now I don't know. I haven't watched its spin cycle yet. I should before I put anything in, but it's so brand new. I got it this weekend. So
see, that's what I did. So we're going on a tangent, but people like tangents.
It's useful to know, actually.
It's useful. What I did is there is a spin only cycle. And so I put a towel in. I started it. I sat down, started knitting in front of the program to see what it did. And unfortunately, once it starts spinning real fast, it just, you know, goes onto the drum of the washing machine, which is great. It shouldn't felt anything. But there was a lot of back and forth before that. So I decided to not try it with my non-superwash things.
I will check that out too.
But, you know, try it with something that won't felt first, and then you'll know. But yes, on the hot bath, me too. It's always in hot water. I feel like wool, non-superwash wool, just blooms so beautifully in warm water.
Astonishingly softened.
And the only times I've felted something is literally when it got forgotten at the bottom of my washing machine, and then my husband started a wash because I had done a spin cycle, and maybe I forgot the sweater in there, and then he put a wash in, and then it felted because it was a literal regular wash cycle.
And that's the agitation that really is making the difference.
Even on a cold cycle. Unfortunately.
And you've made me think about, in terms of yarn choices, we can't, I'm never going to be specific about this is a yarn for a cardigan versus this is a yarn for a pullover.
Yeah,
no,
obviously.
you want to look for the yarn that's going to work for your pattern, regardless of what it is. But one thing that I do notice I often see in pullover, in the cardigan patterns, is lighter wools.
Mm-hmm.
So I rarely see alpaca, for example, as a cardigan yarn because it is so soft and fluffy and heavy that it will really drag itself down. And that could be exactly what you're looking for in like a beautiful, like elegant loungewear type of open cardigan. Again, you'd want less ease than you expect for something like that because you want it to really fit and hug the shoulders, and it'll still be open at the front. But I generally think because cardigans are going to often be open, whether they're short or long, you want a lighter wool choice, and superwash merinos, you'll notice them dragging on you a little bit if you choose those for longer cardigans.
Yeah,
so that's sort of my only guide of like what I would say specifically about yarn choice for cardigans versus pullovers. They will hang differently because they have, like I was talking about, the tension and like the garment holding itself. You give it that space to hang by wearing it open, and a heavier wool is going to take advantage of that and flop a little bit more. Yeah.
That's interesting. I can't wait. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my wool, and now I can't wait to swatch. That's the other thing I was going to say. Absolutely swatch. I know we say to swatch for sweaters all the time, and sometimes we skip it because, we're a little bit...
You and I both, we knit so many pullovers, and we get that experience of, I know what this 3.5mm needle will do with this sport weight yarn.
Yes.
I don't really need to swatch.
Exactly.
But if it's a new kind of garment for you, and I know for myself, again, through all this experience, that I knit different tensions. When I'm knitting flat, I knit a bit tighter than when I'm knitting loose.
Yeah.
So I think about that when you've got that different movement and construction.
Yeah.
In a cardigan, you're probably doing your sleeves in the round, but the body will probably be flat. So you've got to think about, Andrea Maury even mentions this in some of her cardigan patterns.
Yeah, to change the size of needle.
Go down by like a 0.25 if you can, maybe a 0.5mm, or just as you're knitting your sleeve after about an inch, just check in on that gauge.
I've done that. Even in the round, some people change gauge from a big circumference to a small circumference. So like make sure to keep a lifeline somewhere up here when you but what I was gonna say as well is if you're scared of the wool choice, if you want to try rustic wool, you don't know if it's gonna be nice to your skin, make a swatch and wear it inside your sweater a little bit.
That's a good idea. Tuck it under your collar.
If you have access to yarn store, easily, you can buy only one skein. You can swatch. Then you wear it. You wear the swatch like this under your shirt. You see if it feels good or not. Or if you're going to be wearing a long sleeve underneath, you can tuck it in your cuff. And then you don't have to buy all the yarn all at once to know if you're going to like it or not. Or you buy the whole thing because you bought online or whatever. But you still can knit the swatch and make sure it is good for your skin. I did that with my husband because he also is a little bit unsure. Like sometimes some stuff is itchy to him and I wanted to make him a sweater, and he's tall, has really long arms, and I said to him, I am not knitting you a sweater you're not going to end up wearing. So I made him a swatch, and he wore the swatch in his sweater for a little bit, and he was like, oh, that feels really good. And I'm like, perfect, done. I'm knitting you that sweater. So a little extra thing to do with your swatch. Cool. So we're starting this knit along now. Now that the videos are online, we're starting the knit along, and we're going to be running it until Knit City Toronto. Because we had this idea at Knit City Montreal, we thought, why not boucler la boucle, we call it in French, to close the
round it off.
That's good.
Yes, get it done within the year.
At Knit City Toronto, which Naomi and I are going to be attending, so it could be really fun to have a gathering there if some of you are planning on going. Obviously, if you're not going, you're also welcome to do the knit along with us, because we want to.
It's mostly going to be like in the background of our knitting lives. We'll check in on Instagram. We might do another little live video. As we said before, we live quite close to each other. Maybe we'll just go over to one of our houses for a cozy little knitting session and check in. It's really just a sort of a little background motivation for you to get involved in a cardigan, Cal, if you feel like it.
Absolutely. And on Instagram, we're going to be doing the Cardigan Along. So Cardigan Along.
Hashtag in the
hashtag. You can also tag us on Instagram. I'm Claude Tricot and Espace Tricot. It just fits really well. And
both of those things mean knit, as I'm sure your Clo Knits viewers know by now. Tricot means knit, so Espace Tricot means knitting space.
Claude Tricot is just
Claudia Knits.
I just thought it was very cute as a little rhyme. Yeah. And we will most likely have a few little prizes along the way, but nothing, we're really just doing it to keep ourselves accountable on knitting cardigans. And maybe we'll have thoughts.
We wanted to knit a cardigan, so let's do a Cal.
Maybe we'll have thoughts by the end of it on our choices. Did we end up loving the choices that we made? Did we get new insights by knitting those cardigans for the knit along? And you guys too, like if you have insights on like did it help you choose new things, if you learned something by watching this video, which I think you did because I did. So if you learned something, just make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, tell us if you have a cardigan pattern in mind.
Absolutely.
I would love to know.
Or if there's one that you particularly love, and if you don't necessarily want to knit it again, but you think that other people would benefit from, like, if you have a pattern recommendation, please do drop it in the comments, because that would really help all of us decide on our pattern. Or we have decided on our patterns.
Yes.
Go back to episode 1, part 1, to check in about what those were. But we'd also love to see all of the ones that you recommend.
Absolutely, because everything we need is just having more stuff on our knitting to-do list, right?
Always.
So all the links will be in the description box for everything we've talked about. And I want to thank you so much for coming out to my channel.
I just realized, did we even say, just quickly, Knit City Toronto is May 17 to 19.
Yes.
2024.
Yeah.
At the Western Harbour, I think it's called, hotel.
Possibly.
In Toronto. You can head to knitsocial.ca for all those details. Again, we'll link it. So that gives us about, if we're in mid-November, December, January, February, March, April, May, 6 months. That's feasible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's, I think, a good little
and because it's cardigans, then in May it's still gonna be cardigan weather.
At a knitting festival in May in Canada can be chilly, it can be super hot, so it can be air conditioned. So I think a cardigan is a really good layer to have at a knitting festival.
You know what I just thought? If you want to crochet a cardigan,
you can
absolutely crochet a cardigan, because like
it crossed my mind.
We've been talking about knitting a whole lot, but like even I have a crochet cardigan like possibility in my brain, and I think it could be really fun. I have been inspired by crochet recently, like with new patterns. I crocheted a dress recently, and I'm not really like well versed into crochet, but I've seen some beautiful things, and I wish I had more motivation to crochet garments. So please, if you want to crochet a garment,
the opportunity. Granny square cardigans are huge right now. There's one called the Ariana cardigan, again by Amy Christophers, who did the pressed flowers that I am knitting. It is a free pattern from Barocco, Ariana cardigan. I'll put it down below. Really, really gorgeous, inspiring, cute little one.
Yeah.
So the hashtag still works. Cardigan along, eh?
Cardigan along. It doesn't matter if you're knitting or crocheting. Exactly. So we'll see you very soon, hopefully, and please tag us in your beautiful cardigans.
And thank you so much for having me on your episode.
Bye.